Hey, so this is the Drunkalogs, a podcast about addiction and recovery in which each guest shares their version of how it was, what happened, and how it is now, and then endures a half-hour Q&A at the hands of your host, Nick Morton. My next guest grew up in a religious cult where he learned, amongst other things, how to hide that very distinctive life experience that made him different from everyone else. It was a lesson that would serve him handily as his dependence on alcohol deepened, and he somehow managed to hide its effects from everyone close to him, except himself. He eventually found his way to help and has come to learn to value his self-worth regardless of his daily failures and successes. And he shares here such an insightful perspective. Won't you please welcome David G.
I think the most interesting part of it is what happened.
Yeah, sure.
But I'm going to start. I'm going to start at the beginning and just sort of do a little chronology.
Sure.
First.
That sounds great.
So I mean, I had pretty much in many regards, a completely normal-looking childhood. Grew up in suburbia. Went to public school, but there were a couple of very interesting things. You know, my dad was an accountant. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. But there were two big things. One, my dad got sick when I was young, when I was 9 years old, and was chronically ill all growing up. He had a very high quality of life, but it was a very serious illness, and he ultimately passed when I was 25.
What was the illness?
He had leukemia.
Right.
And so there were a number of, it impacted life on a daily basis.
Sure.
And then the other thing is that we were in a cult. And so we lived, we went to I went to public school, but there was this like big sort of family secret. My dad looked normal at his job, and we didn't really talk about it in those kind of environments. And so the important thing, and the reason why I even bring it up, is because very early on, I trained myself and understood that I needed to be fake.
Right.
I didn't like answering difficult questions, so I needed to have a layer of protection to be able to steer the conversation so that you never ask an awkward question. I considered myself a failure when you ask a question that I had to deflect, because there's a limited number of questions that you sort of get to deflect before you arouse suspicion.
That's amazing. I totally relate to that. What was the nature of the cult?
I mean, it was just a very traditional. It was a very traditional culty thing. You know, one charismatic leader has his own interpretation of how things are, and a bunch of followers, and it fizzles out when he gets old and dies.
Did you guys all live together?
No, we didn't. So it was a you know, there were people all across the country. It was actually concentrated in Texas and California for whatever reason.
Is it a famous cult? Is it something we would know?
No one would have
Right.
heard of it, and no one cares about it.
And was it?
And it's gone.
And was there a like a break when your family left it, or did they only leave it when he died?
No, so yeah, it kind of disintegrated. We did actually leave it while I was still at home. But in typical cult-like fashion, once you left, you had, you know, sort of gone to the devil, and you never got to talk to anyone who was a part of it ever again. And so all the friends and people from that just disappeared.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I guess only one of them has ever resurfaced.
Really?
Of all the people I knew.
Did they reach out to you, or did you just run into them somewhere?
They ran into my parents.
Oh, interesting.
Long after it was gone.
Not to dwell on it, but and when you were in this cult, how would it manifest itself? I mean, would you guys get together every night or once a week? Was it like going to church?
No. It was more like going to an odd church. But I mean, let's just say there's lots of things like home visit. So the church didn't have a building. We met in various locations. There were guards on the doors. You couldn't visit the church unless you had completed a program of sort of indoctrination. There were no there were guards on the doors to make sure no reporters or anything like that got in there. That kind of thing. So it was very secretive.
And did your parents sort of warn you not to talk about this to your friends and stuff?
So the interesting thing is that they never warned me not to talk about it, because I think they, particularly my mother, understood that I knew that I wasn't supposed to talk about it. They actually instructed my sister more than they instructed me, but I tend to be an intuitive, sensitive person, and I just kind of absorbed all of that, and I knew better than, and they knew I knew.
That's interesting. It's really interesting as a parent, just like I wonder if that's the healthy thing, like to even though your kid knows, like I was saying to my therapist the other day that like my kids get the joke, like they get the joke, like I don't need to explain it to them, but then I'm like, maybe I should explain it to them just so they know that it's where it is, like
yeah.
Anyway,
so there were two rules in my house growing up. One is don't ever have a problem. And two is if you ever have a problem, never ever talk about it.
Wow, those are brutal rules.
And that was really how it was. And so, different people are a different way. I'm one of those people who I don't ever really remember being okay.
Right.
At 9, my dad gets sick. I don't handle that emotionally well. By 12, I'm completely suicidal. I'm reading pamphlets on designed for parents on how to tell when your kid's going to commit suicide, so I can avoid all of those things so that I don't get stopped.
Wow.
And
do you get to like the actual planning and execution phase of that as a 12-year-old?
I actually did. I had time. I mean, like, I know this now as an adult and having done, I had time, manner, and location.
Wow.
All worked out. And it was only through some unusual circumstances that I didn't end up being able to.
What was your manner going to be?
Yeah, I'd rather not talk about it.
I'm sorry. Okay. No, go.
So by the time I was 15, I found, 14 I started drinking, but at 15 I was blacking out, and alcohol, in many regards, I really do think it helped save me.
What was your sort of entree into booze? Like, what was the first time where you were like, aha?
It was always around. I would say, although it would probably be contested, that my father was a closet alcoholic.
Right.
Who never really got out of control because he got sick.
Right.
But when we were little, he had, he never really did the downward spiral, but
right.
He drank alcoholically, in my opinion.
Right. Sure.
And so, he gave me beers when I was 11 and 12, and,
right.
And stuff like that. So it was always around, and I snuck it, out of liquor cabinets and whatnot.
And when when you started, by the time you're blacking out, do you have like a group that you party with? Like you found a place in the world?
So I was never, this is one of the things, I was never a partier.
Right.
So by 15, I'm sort of blacking out. I mean, I'd go to parties or whatever, but that was not my MO. By the time I was 17, still in high school, I am literally sitting in my closet drinking by myself.
Wow.
And
how much would you drink?
Not crazy amounts at this point in time. But I ultimately end up going to. I remember being at Hazleton, and they do this chart of progression of alcoholism. I'm like, I am at the bottom of the chart by the time I'm 17.
And then how long is it till you get to Hazleton? Like what year is that?
So let me just keep
I mean,
going
just to
then.
give you just so we've got some time frame. I'm just curious.
So that is 1990. I'm sitting in my closet drinking alone, and I go to Hazleton in 2008.
Right. All right.
And of course, don't stay sober. So yeah, so I'm graduating from high school. I'm supposed to go to college, and I know that I have this huge problem with drinking.
And you've done well in high school? You've
very mediocre student.
Right. Okay.
Sort of good test scores, but can't seem to get my homework done for some reason.
And are you socially successful? Like you've got friends and shit?
I'm just popular enough not to be picked on. Like right. 2 tiers off the bottom, 2 steps off the bottom.
That's a good spot. So
I'm not. Yeah, I'm not popular, but I'm. I think most people don't remember me from high school because like there was nothing. I didn't stick out.
Remarkable, right?
Yes, right. So I'd gone and visited a college, and I remember opening the fridge in the dorm room, and it was full of beer, and I was like, I don't know, like this is not gonna work for me. I'm never. I mean, if there's beer just sitting in the fridge every day, and I'm not drinking warm beer sitting on my floor, in my closet, I am in a world of hurt. And so I did the only thing that I knew to do, which is I went to Baylor and I got in the most conservative evangelical community possible to where drinking was really seen as bad.
Wow. Let me ask you something. Was the cult Christian?
Yeah, it was Christian, but it was not.
Right.
So it was not. It was its own Christian. Yeah. And
kind of Christian.
Drinking wasn't prohibited.
Right.
And it was its own little thing.
Right.
But so I became like a very traditional evangelical Christian, where drinking is frowned upon.
Amazing. And is it is it a fraternity you're in? Is it an evangelical fraternity?
So I joined a Christian fraternity that does not allow drinking. They literally kick you out if they catch you drinking.
Wow.
Not only are there not, booze at the party or whatever, but like there's absolutely no drinking allowed. And all my friends are that way.
Yeah. I mean, what an interesting way to try to manage the problem.
Yes.
That's fascinating. I've never heard that before.
Of course, I didn't like tell anyone any of this.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, because see, the rules in my house growing up, don't have a problem and don't talk about it.
Yeah.
So I never said any of this to any of my friends or anything like that. It actually worked quite well.
You didn't actually drink while you were there?
Freshman year I drank very little. It really cut down on my consumption dramatically.
Right.
I'd come home for spring break and I'd drink or something like that. But like it wasn't. I did very little drinking there for the first 3 years.
Wow.
But my senior year, the summers were bad, and because I wasn't in that environment. And so by senior year, I'm drinking every day, 7 days a week. And so I go, okay, I went through this thing and I was like, all right, I'm not going to drink for a month. And that'll sort of like.
When you started drinking senior year, did you have to kind of like excommunicate yourself?
Yeah,
no, you hit it all.
Yeah.
You were still the squeaky clean evangelical, but who was still drinking in his closet on his own time.
Yes.
Were people suspicious?
I don't know. I actually know.
Right.
They were not suspicious. Right. So I'm sitting in my room by myself and I'm drinking for the, 4th time in a month of my dry month.
Uh-huh.
And I realized that I just can't quit drinking.
Right.
And so I literally just like sit there, get drunk, cry, and I just kind of resigned myself to this is the way things are going to be. And so that is 1994, and I drank 7 days a week until 2008.
And during that time, how much, like, what was a typical day?
Well, so, I mean, obviously it's a long time period.
Yeah.
I mean, it didn't stop me from getting married, having kids, having a job, all sorts of things like that. But by the end,
Did you go to business school?
I did not.
Right.
By the end, it was really bad. I mean, the last several years are just very, very foggy to me. I mean, I was drinking a gargantuan amount. I mean, I don't know. I knew, the only thing I know is I needed 10 drinks to like not go through withdrawal.
And what time of the day would you usually take those 10 drinks?
So my pattern was, and again, this is all sort of towards the end. My pattern was, I would get up at 6 or 6:30, deal with the kids, go to work, do my job. My job is financial related. The stock market closes at 3:00. So then I would be in sort of a world of hurt by then. And so I'd, go to a bar and have a handful of drinks,
right,
maybe a little more, then go home and sort of at a normal quitting time, get home 5:30 or 6.
right.
And deal with the kids, dinner, stuff like that. And then when the kids went to bed, that's when I would really drink. And of course I'd be drinking at home some with dinner and things like that.
And was your wife like in the
so I go to bed, I drink heavily, fall asleep, then wake up in the middle of the night and drink more to go back to sleep.
Oh God, that's the worst.
Do the 2 a.m. pound 4 or 5 drinks.
Oh God.
To then wake up at 6 or 6:30 and start the whole process.
Oh, I mean, that just makes me sick to my stomach.
Yes.
When you married your wife, was she aware at all that you had a drinking problem?
No. So one of the all of our stories are the same and all of them are different. But one of the things about my story is that when I went to rehab in 2008, and before I went to rehab in 2008, no one in the world knew that I was an alcoholic.
They couldn't smell booze with that much drinking. You didn't reek of booze.
Well, I of course I had a beer as soon as I came home, or a drink.
Right. Yeah. So you'd have, of course, I've got booze on my breath. Yeah.
Right. Cocktail when I get home. Of course I have booze on my breath.
Right.
I had but yeah, my business partner didn't know. My wife didn't know. My family didn't know. I didn't have drinking buddies that actually knew how much I drank. Nobody. And it's really funny. I ended up going to rehab 5 times. I can talk about all that process. But in all the rehabs I went to and all the people I ever talked to, nobody had ever heard of anyone actually getting to rehab without anyone in their life knowing that they were an addict. And except I met this one woman at this one rehab, and she had grown up in the same cult I had in a different city and was the same age.
No way.
Yeah.
That is wild.
And it's just that training of like, I had been trained from such a young age. She did exactly the same thing. She was in the cult, but went to a public school, had a very normalish life on the outside. And it's just the daily training of like how to control the conversation and manipulate the things so that people don't ask questions and no one really has any idea who you are or what you're doing.
So intense.
So in 2008, I never drank as much as I did again there on a daily basis. It was really, so I went to rehab in 2008 a couple of times.
What finally sort of brought you, because obviously that's a big coming out as a secret addict, to come to have to be like, guys, whoa, actually,
I literally went through 2 weeks where I called like everyone in my life and I was like, hey, guess what? I'm like totally closet alcoholic, and I tell everybody. It was like a complete pain. And it was awful. So there were two things. One was, I mean, my physical health had really deteriorated. I mean, every time something would go wrong, I'd Google it, and like the first thing that would pop up is like, that it's caused by excessive drinking.
Right.
I quit going to the gym because you can't get rid of lactic acid because it's processed by your liver. And so if your liver's busy 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, processing alcohol, you stay sore. I mean, I would go to the gym, I'd stay sore for weeks.
Oh,
literally.
Amazing. I didn't realize that. Huh.
And so like, I so I had that aspect of it. And then the other thing was I was not really that depressed or anything like that. But when I drank, sometimes it got really, really bad. And I was afraid. I was genuinely afraid that I was going to kill myself in a blackout and I would never know it.
Right.
And then yeah, and that was really one of the things. I was just like, I'm never going to even be cognizant of the fact that I did this.
Right. You won't even have had like the honest conversation with yourself about what is a life worth living and why do I need to kill myself. You will have just done it irrationally under the influence of alcohol and like, somehow you'll end up in the afterlife and they'll be like, what happened? You'll be like, I don't remember.
I don't have any idea. You tell me.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And that really disturbed me.
And so were you stewing on that for weeks and then you were finally I've got to do something, or was there
it was about 6 months of stewing on it and attempting to I never tried to cut back. And so I kind of attempted to cut back a little bit and couldn't, of course.
Yeah, it's so hard.
So after about 6 months, I was like, of that back and forth, I was just like, I got to do something. Like,
right.
And I honestly didn't want to quit drinking.
Right.
I knew I needed to drink a lot less. I wanted to drink like 90% less.
Right. Sure.
And I didn't know I was not aware of anyone that I knew that was in recovery or had gone to rehab.
Right.
I mean, like all I knew from rehab is it's like what celebrities do. And I didn't really even want to go to rehab. I just wanted to quit drinking. I didn't want to go to AA. I mean, I clicked on like an AA website at one point in time and I was like, ugh, like,
yeah, gross.
God this and God that and, stuff like that. So, so I went to rehab in January of 2008. In between 2008 and 2011, I never got more than 4 months sober. But I continuously tried. I was continuously cycling in and out. I actually found an AA meeting that I liked, and went to it a lot the whole time. And it was a 6:30 a.m. meeting. And I mean, I did all the classic. I mean, I picked up 30 plus Desire chips. I showed up drunk to a 6:30 a.m. meeting many times. I didn't want to drink, but I did not know how to live my life sober. And I had a very intense desire to check out all the time.
Was your family just like incomprehensibly demoralized by this cycle of...
Generally they're not that aware of how much I'm drinking.
Right.
I just get super, super secret about it. Switch to only vodka. Learn how to mix vodka and water in Ozarka bottles so that you can't really tell that it doesn't smell when you open the bottle. Things like that.
Right.
So in 2011, I go to rehab again in January.
And are you trying different places? Are you trying
a different place every time. Yeah. Hazelden was August of 2008.
Right.
I go to the Meadows in 2011 in April, and my life is truly before and after the Meadows. I didn't stay sober, but like that's when my life changed.
Where is that place?
It's out in Arizona.
I feel like I just interviewed somebody else who was there, but I can't remember.
It's kind of like one of the, I mean, I think the Meadows and Hazelden are kind of like the famous places.
Right.
But I remember I was doing the intake. Of course, I'm drunk on the phone. The lady just like suggested, she asked me a bunch of questions about like how I grew up and things like that. And I was like, why are you asking all this? And she just gently suggested, if you were sitting in your room drinking alone by the time you were 17, something might have gone wrong before then. And the thought had never occurred to me. And I was like, that kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
Like that seems plausible. And so I went there, and so I have this belief. One of the beliefs I have is that I do not have the ability to imagine what it is like to have a higher quality of mental health than I have personally experienced.
Yeah, that's fair.
And I did not know that like life like I experienced it was possible. So there were a couple of things I learned from all of my effort. From 2011, it was like the year of rehab. I was always in inpatient or outpatient or and in groups, and I went to tons of AA meetings and things like that. And at the end of it, I learned, call it a few things. One is it's really hard to see myself as I am, and I need to talk to people and have them reflect back to me a different part of me. I need lots of different interactions to be able to get a picture of myself. I like the image of a tailor's mirror, where every interaction I have is a different point on the tailor's mirror, and it allows me to build a 3-dimensional composite picture of myself.
Yeah.
And then the next thing I learned was that all suffering is optional.
Wow.
So I love the saying, pain is inevitable, suffering is optional. Your dog's going to die. That's really painful. It's sad. It hurts. But what I mean by the suffering is, the question, I should have taken him to the vet sooner. If I'd done this or that. And yes, there are legitimate questions of proper veterinary care for a dog. But everything beyond that is what I'm talking about. That's the suffering. And not one drop of that is required.
Right.
It is all, I am a volunteer for every single drop of suffering. And this is a completely different. When I was growing up, I thought my job was to suffer. And I actually thought I proved my masculinity by being able to suffer an immense amount of pain and get up and suit up and show up the next day.
Yeah.
That's what I thought I sort of earned my self-worth by being able to, I don't know, be Jason from Friday the 13th and have an axe in my head and, have been bludgeoned 10 different ways and still go.
Yeah.
And so it's a completely different for me to see that all of that, instead of pushing through the suffering, my job is to figure out how not to suffer. And one of the most important things on that is that the suffering does not come random. It's not like a lightning strike out of a clear blue sky. All suffering that I experience comes from lies that I tell myself that stem from deep false beliefs. So what do I mean by that? the suffering comes from the belief that like I need to earn my self-worth, that I'm not inherently valuable as a human being, and so I need to be smarter, better looking, earn more money, have better relationships, have better friends, be nicer, whatever it is. And that's how I'm going to earn my value as a human being, and then I'll be okay. Um, and uh, and so when I fail to be those ways, then I end up suffering. I don't know if this makes any sense at
It
all, but
makes total sense. It makes
okay.
total sense. Are you kidding? It's fascinating, and I relate to it 100%. And I think that it's interesting. I mean, I haven't heard it put in these terms of suffering. And one of the things that really resonates with me is that, Christ is the ultimate figure of suffering in some ways. I mean, certainly as it is portrayed so often in religion and, as opposed to the Christ of love and the Christ of forgiveness, there is also this intense, gory martyrdom that comes with that story that I feel like, you know, I internalize that, like, yeah, you don't earn your place unless you suffer for it. Anyway, but so
go ahead.
no, you go. You're saying
Okay.
more
Well,
interesting
there's
stuff than I am.
The last thing is, I really one of the other things I learned is I think it's just self-compassion. I think is very underappreciated. And I found it very challenging for me to be, call it 37 years old, and look at things I did at 35 and have any sort of self-compassion. I looked at what I did and I was like, I'm just an asshole. And so it didn't work at all. And I was very stuck in that regard.
Right.
But what I learned over time is that if I start at age 0 instead of age 37, and I work of how I got to age 35. So, okay, there were some weird things when I was really young, and then I'm 9 years old, my dad gets sick, then I'm 12, I'm suicidal, then I'm 15, and I start blacking out, and I discover that alcohol really can help me get through all of this. And then I'm 17 and I start kind of drinking regularly. And then before you know it, I'm 35 years old. And it's a lot easier for me to have compassion for my 9-year-old self, my 12-year-old self, my 15-year-old. Like, my kids are over 15 now. Like I know how little they are as independent human beings,
Sure.
And so it's really hard for me to blame my 9-year-old self for the way I was.
Right.
And so then before you know it, I'm 35 years old, and like, I get it. It doesn't make it okay. It's not excusing anything, but it allowed to take some of the shame away from my behavior and go, and that's how I got here. And I don't have to be that way.
Right.
And I can live a different life. That doesn't have to be the end of the story. I think one of the most powerful things is a coherent personal narrative that arcs towards improvement.
Wow. Yeah.
Because it's, how do I want, and this is how I what it's like today, what do I want my life to look like? I do very poorly, like many addicts, when I do not respond well to being told I need to do something because it's the right thing to do.
Sure.
It sends up all of my, like, no, I don't, I'll show you, like all of that kind of response. But if I go, what do I want my life to look like? And how do I get there? Then it's much easier to be like, well, I want to live life this way. That's what I want my life to look like. And then what are the things necessary to do that? Well, it's probably best not to just lie to everybody that you talk to all the time if you actually want to have meaningful relationships with people, like little subtle things like that.
It's so interesting. I mean, I have one big question. There's so much here that's interesting to talk about. I mean, I guess um, one of the things that I struggle with in that concept of, sort of forgiving myself and believing that my self-worth is inherent is that I too cannot see myself in the world. And in the most simplest ways, sometimes, like a perfect example of this is I'll be at the gym and I will catch a glimpse of myself in the mirror. And I'm like, who's that dude? And it's me. And I'm like, and sometimes this is going to sound gross, but like sometimes I will see myself and I'll be like, I wish I was that dude, because he's tall and he's standing upright. His like body looks pretty healthy and normal. And then I'm like, oh wait, that's me. I am that dude. And like in my head, I am something else. I am Gollum. I am something disgusting and,
Yes.
blithering and drooling on myself. And then like, I'm like, oh wait, that's not how I present in the world at all. And like that disconnect. And it's interesting how you say like, oh, sort of interacting with the world helps you kind of get a sense of who you are. And I mean, one of the things that like I feel like I'm striving for in my life is to just always believe in my own self-worth, my inherent self-worth, that I don't need to find out what the world thinks of me, because I'm okay. And like I'm not there by any means, but I feel like when I'm at my healthiest, I'm not really even clocking my perception in the world.
Right. So yeah, I definitely think that the belief that I am inherently valuable and I do not earn my value through my good deeds or good works or anything else is one of the most important things um, for me, or other people's approval of me, or anything like that. I, you know, and I understand that that's related to sort of how I see myself, but they are kind of separate things at some level. I think it's really hard to see, like, to see myself as I am, or the way that other people perceive me. And that's not to let other people's perception of me control me, but it's to facilitate relationships. I mean, one of the things I definitely believe is that isolation is the disease.
Sure.
And so
Yeah.
it's hard to build meaningful relationships with people if you don't understand who you are and what, if I don't understand my own strengths and weaknesses and who I am and how I'm perceived, then it's extremely difficult to build those connections,
Right.
with people.
I have two questions actually. One
Sure.
is, you got divorced somewhere along the way.
Oh
You have
yeah, I
four.
did get divorced along the
And
way.
did that happen
Two,
in sobriety?
yeah, 2 years sober, I got divorced.
And that's so interesting to me, to go through, a multi-year marriage using heavily and then get sober and end out divorced. Like,
Yeah, that was not the plan. Um, so, uh, you know, I changed the deal of the relationship when I got sober. And I actually said that, we had, I mean, there's a whole literature of love addicts and love avoidance. And, uh, I would describe our relationship as a love avoidant. And it's actually it basically means that neither one of you is trying to be close to the other one.
Right.
And so we just kind of lived our own separate parallel lives.
Right.
Um, I mean, we had kids and we parented and stuff like that, but I mean, like, really, it was pretty independent living.
Mm-hmm.
Um, uh, uh, Certainly from an emotional connection aspect. Uh, and so it just I wanted, I did not want that kind of relationship after I got sober.
Right.
And it, after much effort, it proved that it was just not possible for us to have that relationship.
Right.
Um, you know, too much damage,
Right.
to and whatnot, and again, not even the way I was drinking 7 days a week when the relationship started. It was never part of the deal.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I mean, when my wife and I got married, my wife knew I was an alcoholic. It was like I clearly had a drinking problem. And it was like she married me anyway. And then when I stopped drinking, it was like, well, what's our life going to be like if Nick isn't drinking? Like how, and there's a lot of like crazy Nick that now has to be managed, that used to be able to be put to bed with a cocktail, that now is like up ranting around and making everyone nuts at 10 o'clock at night,
Right, yeah.
And like, that's a lot for everyone to deal with, but I think it's better maybe than anesthetized Nick, who wouldn't, it's like, well, we wouldn't really deal with shit, but at least he wasn't, aggravated. So.
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, I can remember, I mean, this is part of the trap of addiction is, I mean, I can remember sober picking fights with my now ex-wife where I'm like, I totally just picked that fight, and if I had been drinking, we would have never fought.
Oh, yeah, totally.
and that was actually a true statement.
Yeah,
okay?
Sure.
Not the most helpful statement,
right.
But a true statement, and so it does make it a very. It's very hard to get out of that because there are certain functional aspects to it.
Sure. Yeah.
And the transition is a lot. I had no idea how to manage my feelings. I am a very emotional, passionate person. I did not know how it. I had no clue how to manage my feelings. I knew how to numb them. And I like saying that, chemicals are great because they provide exactly the same sort of impact every single time. Exactly, I knew exactly what I was going to get, exactly have a drink and da-da-da-da-da. People are so freaking annoying. You never know what you're going to get.
Yeah, from minute to minute.
Yes, they change all the time.
I'm like, wait. I thought we were in a lull here. Oh, we're actually in a fucking storm. I didn't even realize that. It looked different to me.
It was 10 minutes ago. It was great.
What? And have you had significant relationships since then? Are they different?
Oh, it's all very different. I mean, I don't know. I mean, yeah, it's and my, of course, I didn't talk at all about this, but relationship with the kids is probably the thing that has been by far the largest change.
Yeah. What is that like?
So since 2011, when I went to the Meadows, I have not yelled at my kids.
That's amazing.
And before, that was just like how it operated, right? I mean, you do something wrong, you get yelled at.
Sure.
And that turns out it's not a good idea.
So damaging.
And it's actually not effective.
It's not effective at all.
It's effective sometimes in the short run. I actually have this whole little theory on why this works. It's probably not worth the time, but
what is it?
You really want to hear it?
Yeah, I'm curious. I mean, as a parent, certainly, and someone who used to yell a lot. Now I don't really yell, but I used to.
So Danny Kahneman's this famous psychologist who won the Nobel Prize in economics. He was the psychologist that was put in charge of the Israeli Air Force training at one point in time, and he went through and he said, well, what do you do? How do you handle pilots? And they said, oh, if they do well, we don't praise them, and if they do badly, we yell at them. And he goes, oh, why do you do that? He goes, well, every time they do a good job and we praise them, the next time they don't do a good job. And every time they do a bad job and we yell at them, they do better the next time.
Right.
And he's like, oh, that's really interesting. You've discovered reversion to the mean.
Right.
So,
Right. Wow.
So they do better the next time because they were going to do better the next time because they did bad the time before. And
totally.
They do worse the time before. They do worse when you praise them because they were going to do worse because they did really great and amazing.
Anyway, right. Yeah.
So, and it's the illusion of control that what we're saying is actually the thing that's going on. And I think the same thing is true with parenting, is that we learn from repetition the reversion to the mean. If we yell at our kids, they're better the next day.
Yeah.
And if we are super nice to them, they're worse the next day. And so over time we get this whole training and it's not, it's just a misperception.
Right.
And it doesn't, because it's not on a long enough timeline, because we don't experience things like that.
Sure.
You can't experience large numbers. And so, as a result, I think punishment does virtually no good, at all in parenting. It's just remarkable.
I just found that like the cycle of screaming at my kids made me feel so terrible that I was like, well, it makes them feel terrible and it makes me feel terrible. So there's nothing in it for either of us. So I'm just going to stop doing it. And I did at the start of quarantine, I yelled at my daughter and she ran upstairs and was crying. And I came up and I was like, hey, I'm sorry. And she was like, it's okay, Dad, you haven't yelled at us in 5 years. And I was like, okay, thanks.
We'll give you that one.
I guess the other thing, and this is kind of a programmy question, but I'm just curious, as a guy who grew up in a, sort of religious cult, what's your conception of a higher power at this point?
Yeah, so if I was just walking around, most people would call me an atheist.
Right.
I think the important part is, so very early on, I was fortunate enough to run into a guy, and he said the important thing about sort of, the second step or something like that is that you aren't God and vodka's not God.
I think that's really good advice.
And he's like, if you can accept that you aren't God and vodka's not God, you're going to be fine.
Yeah.
And I was like, I can do that. And I think that I would add one other component. There's a certain requirement of humility. I don't know.
Yeah.
And that goes with not being God yourself. But I think that a certain level of humility is required, and whether or not that's humility to a higher power or a humility to just the I don't understand, I don't think is particularly important. There are secular AA meetings. I've gone to them. A lot of times, there's a bunch of angry people there. I'm not like one of these angry people who is. I'm not going to join the Atheist League or something like that. I mean, that's just not. That's not me. I think there's a lot of different ways that people conceptualize, for lack of a better way of putting it, the spiritual realm that works for them. And I have no interest in changing their view of it.
Yeah, good luck.
It's just great. That works for you. I
respect that or whatever. I don't even have to respect it. It's just has nothing to do with me.
Right. Okay. I think the old Dr. Phil, how's that working for you is a really good question. If it's working for you, great. It's working for you. If it's not, well, maybe we should look into that and see if we can't come up with something a little better.
Yeah, it's interesting. I asked the question just because I'm not as an opportunity to judge people, but as an opportunity to hear how other people sort of reconcile this major part of the program with whatever other part of their life may have been like. And just the idea of it's not you and it's not vodka. I think I've never heard that before. And I think that is amazing, because for me, I didn't realize I still struggle with the idea that, because in my humility, I would never posit that I am God, but I often act like I am. I often act like I can actually control the outcomes of things. And I suffer for my belief that I control them. And the reality is when I let go of this fantasy that I control the outcome, I actually let go of a lot of my suffering. And that's where I've
Yes.
found relief.
Yes, and all suffering is optional. And yes, a deep false belief would be that I should be in control of things that I am not capable of controlling, because that's the way it should be.
Right. And then also my sense of self-worth actually degrades based on the fact that I did not control it to the outcome that I desired. And when I can let go of that, then my self-worth remains intact even when things go badly for me.
Yes. Along those lines, yeah, it's not good for me to tie my self-worth to the weather.
Yeah. And why would you? You never would. Though actually, I'm sure I have. I think I
I'm
have.
sure I have as well. Like,
I have blamed myself for making a plan that was queered by the weather, and I'm like, I'm a fucking idiot.
Yes. And yes, exactly. And so that's yeah. So I do the last thing I'll say on the sort of the spiritual stuff or whatever, I do meditate regularly.
Right.
And I find meditation very, very helpful to me. One of the best things about meditation is I say it's like taking my temperature.
Uh-huh.
It's very hard for me to lie to myself when I sit still and I'm quiet.
Interesting.
So a lot of my defense mechanism is I'm a minimizer. Oh, that doesn't really matter. Oh, that's not that important to me. Oh, that's
sure.
how I manage things. And then I sit down and it's like, that's the 22nd time in 2 minutes that you've thought about this. Even,
oh, interesting.
Like, maybe it's actually bothering you.
Right.
Yeah, you might notice that like there's a lot of energy around this topic. And it keeps coming up. But when I'm capable of distracting myself through busyness and everything, and just life. I mean, I have a full life. I have a job, and I have, kids and work and blah, 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 blah. Other stuff too. And not to mention Netflix or,
right.
the internet. And so I think it really provides a time where I can't ignore how I'm doing. I know how I'm doing when I sit still. How easy is it for me to count my breaths? How many times do I have intrusive thoughts? What are those intrusive thoughts and those sorts of things? And it really does feel like it just takes my temperature, and it's a little self-check-in and reduces self-denial.
Interesting. It's funny because I use it I use it to check out. I mean, I use it to get present. I use it to turn off every sort of analytical thought in my brain. I use it to stop worrying. I use it to not check my temperature.
Yeah, no, I mean,
which is just interesting, it's a different,
the same thing, different people experience different ways.
Yeah.
I mean,
but by the same token, I don't do it nearly enough. I really wish I did it more, because every time I do it, I'm like, well, that was great. It's like, when I go for a run or go for a walk or something, like that always works for me, and meditation always works for me, but I'm much more inclined to go for a run or get some exercise than I am to, meditate.
One of the great mysteries to me that I still haven't, I don't have any idea what the answer to this is, but it is just remarkable how easy it is for me to do things that harm myself, and how hard it is for me to do things that are good for me.
Oh man, so true.
I mean, why is it hard to go to the gym?
Right.
Yeah, I feel better every time.
Yeah.
And it's not that I don't ever go. Of course, I go. But would I benefit if I went more? Of course I would. Would I meditate very regularly. I miss days. I I often sit for shorter time periods than I could. Things like that.
Yeah, totally.
But it's really hard to get me to set the timer for 20 minutes instead of 10 minutes. You know, I mean, like, what am I doing? That's like, I don't have an extra 10 minutes, but it feels so hard.
Yeah.
It's just amazing. And yet it was no problem to, you know, wake up at 6:30 every morning, hungover, and drink again. Like
waste 12 hours drinking.
Right. That was very easy to go back to. It's just mind blowing to me. I don't get it.
Well, David, thank you so much. It's really been amazing to hear this. This was not only an amazing story, but it's got so much insight and wisdom in it, if I dare say so myself. So I really appreciate you taking the time this Saturday morning.
Excellent. I'll leave you with one final little concluding thought, if I can.
Yeah.
So, you know, what's the difference? Before, I had good days and bad days, but at the end of the day, I was never okay. Now I have good days and bad days, but at the end of the day, I'm always okay. And that's the difference. And I really would, I really would like to encourage anyone who doesn't feel okay to know that it can be different.
Yeah, that's huge. I mean, that thing you said at the very beginning where you couldn't imagine a healthier state of mind than the one that you've experienced. Like, it's hard to believe it's out there and that you can actually have it yourself. It sometimes seems like, oh, that's the realm of other people.
Yeah.
Like, this is the lot that I have been given. And as you say, I can choose not to suffer, actually.
Right. So anyway.
Awesome. All right. Enjoy the rest of your day. Yeah, it's great talking to you. I will. I'll hit you up when this is about to go up. All right. Hey, so if you've been enjoying this podcast, you can head over to my Patreon page and feel completely free to support the show with a modest contribution at www.patreon.com/thedrunkalogs. Drunkalogs cover art is designed and created by John DeManil, and the Drunkalogs theme song is composed and performed by Stephen Stout. I am Nick Morton.